The morning light shone through the blinds, streaking the floor of my bedroom. I'd been lying with my eyes open for about an hour, listening to the silence of the house. 5 years ago, it had been broken by the voice of Madeline, my wife, who always got up before me and rattled the dishes in the kitchen. Now the house was silent, as if it had been orphaned by her departure. I got out of bed, feeling the familiar ache in my knees. 68 years old is no joke, especially with 30 years of working on construction sites. Inspector wasn't the most physically demanding position, but climbing unfinished buildings, climbing temporary ladders, and jumping over ditches was a regular occurrence. Now my knees reminded me of those times with every movement. "Good morning, Maddie," I murmured, looking at the picture on the bedside table. It showed my wife and me standing in front of the Grand Canyon, happy and tanned. It was 2 years before her diagnosis. Walking into the kitchen, I turned on the coffee maker, the only appliance I'd learned to use perfectly. Madeline had always laughed at my clumsiness in culinary matters. "Ted Holloway can determine whether the foundation will support a 3-story building, but he can't cook scrambled eggs without disaster," she used to say. I could handle basic meals now, but often dined at Donna's Cafe on the corner of my street. The local cuisine wasn't the most refined, but they knew me by name there, and always had my favorite table by the window. While the coffee maker buzzed, I perused the morning paper. Although I could read the news online on the tablet my son had given me last Christmas, I preferred the paper version. There was something soothing about the rustling pages and the smell of printing ink. The phone rang, and I reluctantly picked it up. My son's name popped up on the screen. "Good morning, Christopher," I said, taking my first sip of coffee. "Hi, Dad." My son's voice sounded familiarly tentative. "How are you doing?" "The usual. My knees are creaky, but everything else is working fine." "Good, good," he faltered, and I realized that the call wasn't just to be polite. "Listen, I was wondering, did you get the invitation?" I knew what he was talking about. "Yesterday, a golden boss card came in the mail inviting me to my grandchildren, Pierce and Esther's, college graduation party. The card was signed by Christopher and his wife Beatrice, though I had no doubt that it was entirely Bee's initiative. She loved formality and ceremony. "Yes, I got it. Thanks for the invitation. Will you come?" There was hope in my son's voice. I suppressed a sigh. Of course, I wanted to congratulate my grandchildren, but the prospect of spending the evening in the company of Beatrice and her snobbish parents didn't appeal to me. "I'll try," I replied evasively. "Dad, please," he said, his voice a little pleading now. "It's important to the kids. They really want to see you." I doubted the latter. The twins had been polite to me, of course, but our relationship had become formal in recent years. Beatrice had skillfully driven a wedge between me and their entire family, especially since Madeline's death. "I'll come, Chris," I said at last. "For Pierce and Esther." "Thanks, Dad." The relief in his voice was almost palpable. "Bee's booked some great catering, and Evan Costello's parents will be there too. Remember, Evan is Pierce's best friend." He continued to talk about the details of the party, and I mentally shut down. Beatrice won't miss the opportunity to brag to the town about her successful children, and of course, her role in that success. Getting the twins into Westfield College was a personal victory for her, even though it was only a community college, and not the prestigious university she had dreamed of. "And Dad," Christopher's voice brought me back to the conversation, "maybe you won't bring up the sale of the eastern parcels? Bee's still upset, and—" "I'm not going to discuss my business at your kid's party, Chris," I interrupted him sharply. "But I'm also not going to pretend that my property is already your inheritance for you to dispose of." There was an awkward pause. "That's not what I meant, Dad," Christopher said quietly. "I just wanted this evening to be stress-free." I softened. Christopher was always caught between two fires, me on one side and his bossy wife on the other. "Don't worry," I said in a calmer tone. "I'll behave myself, I promise." After talking to my son, I went out on the back porch with a cup of coffee. My house stood on a hill overlooking a large part of Wheatland. I could see the main street with its stores, the town square with its fountain, and, a little farther away, the industrial area. The 3 buildings in that zone belonged to me, as did the 2 office spaces in the center. Real estate was my retirement project that had begun 30 years ago with the purchase of my first abandoned warehouse. Madeline thought I was crazy at the time, putting our savings into a dilapidated building, but supported me as always. Now my small commercial real estate business was bringing in a steady income, allowing me to live comfortably and not worry about the future. It was this property that was the stumbling block between me and my son's family, or rather, between me and Beatrice. I finished my coffee and went to get dressed. On Tuesdays, I usually met with Harold Kincaid, my longtime friend and lawyer, at Donna's Cafe. These meetings became a tradition after retirement, and I appreciated them for the opportunity to talk to a man of my generation. Harold was already waiting at our table when I entered the cafe. The old lawyer's wrinkled face stretched into a smile at the sight of me. "Ted, I thought you weren't coming. I was about to order without you. And deprive me of Donna's specialty omelet?" I sat across from him. "Never." Donna, a full-figured woman in her 50s with perpetually disheveled red hair, came to our table with a coffee pot. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, filling our cups. "The usual?" We nodded and she retreated to the kitchen, shouting our order to the cook. "How are you doing, Ted?" Harold asked, stirring sugar into his coffee. "You look a little preoccupied." "Got an invitation to the grandkids' party," I said. "The twins went to college." "Oh, Pierce and Esther?" Harold nodded. "Congratulations, smart kids." "Like their grandmother," I said proudly. "Madeline always said they had a great future." "How do you like the prospect of spending the evening with the Ice Queen?" Harold asked, using the nickname we had given Beatrice years ago. I grimaced. "And what do you think?" "I anticipate cold stares and passive, aggressive comments about how much money they spend on their children's education." Harold hummed understandingly. "Is she still hoping you'll give them the real estate management?" "She doesn't just hope, she takes it for granted." I sipped my coffee. "Christopher called last week with her idea for me to sign a power of attorney for the Eastern properties. Allegedly, it would be easier for me if they took on this onerous responsibility." "And what did you say?" "The same answer I always give, that as long as I'm alive, I'll manage my own property." Donna brought our order, scrambled eggs and bacon for me and pancakes for Harold. While we ate, I told my friend about the latest offer from Frontier Development, which wanted to buy my land in the industrial zone to build a new logistics center. "The offer is very favorable," I said. "And to be honest, I'm tired of dealing with these buildings all the time. Maybe it's time to sell everything and enjoy the rest of my years." Harold looked at me carefully. "What about the plans to leave the business to Christopher?" I shrugged. "Those were Madeline's plans, not mine. She had always wanted the family business to stay in the family. But to see Beatrice trying to take over while I was still alive," I shook my head. "I'm not sure I want to encourage that kind of behavior." "Did you talk to Christopher about it?" "I tried. But you know my son. He always agrees with whoever talked to him last. As soon as I leave, Beatrice convinces him otherwise." After breakfast, I went to the East Lot to meet with a representative from Frontier Development. A young man in a perfectly fitting suit was waiting for me at the entrance to the warehouse. He introduced himself as Noel Cherry, and I could hardly contain a smile. The guy looked too young for such a last name. We walked around the grounds discussing the details of a possible deal. Noel made no secret of the fact that the company wanted the land because of its convenient location near the highway. "Mr. Holloway," he said as we walked back to his car, "I hope you'll consider our offer. The company is willing to make concessions on many points." "I will consider it, Mr. Cherry," I replied. "But I must warn you that there are family circumstances that may affect my decision." He nodded understandingly, asking no further questions, and we parted. When I returned home, I found a message on my answering machine. Beatrice's voice sounded strangely polite. "Ted, it's Beatrice. I hope you got our invitation to Pierce and Esther's college admissions party. I wanted to clarify if you're coming so that we can properly calculate the seating capacity. Please call me back." I didn't call back right away. Instead, I sat in a chair on the veranda with a notepad and began writing down the pros and cons of selling the business. To my surprise, the list of pros was considerably longer. Perhaps it was time for a change. In the evening, I still called Beatrice, deciding not to complicate matters. "Ah, Beatrice, it's Ted," I said when she answered. "I got your message." "Yeah, I'll be at the party." "Oh, good," she said, a slight disappointment in her voice that she couldn't hide. "The party starts at 6. We expect the guests to be dressed up." "I remember how to dress for parties, Beatrice," I said dryly. "Of course you do, Ted." Her tone turned sweet. "I just wanted to make sure everything would be perfect for the children." After a short pause, she added, By the way, I heard you met with someone from Frontier Development today. I felt myself tense up. Wheatland was a small town, but the speed with which information reached Beatrice always surprised me. Yes, there was a representative, I said neutrally. The usual meeting. Christopher said they want to buy the eastern parcels, she continued. I hope you're not making any hasty decisions, Ted. This property is part of the family legacy. My legacy, Beatrice, I corrected her. And I haven't made any decisions yet. Of course you haven't, her voice sounded fake. Just think about Pierce and Esther's future. College is just the beginning of their expenses. Christopher and I won't be able to provide everything they need without additional income. I held back the irritation that was about to erupt. Typical Beatrice, insinuating her claim to my money while hiding behind childcare. See you at the party, Beatrice, I said instead of answering and hung up. The rest of the week passed in the usual business. I met with the tenants of my premises, had lunch with a few more old friends, and visited Madeline's grave, bringing fresh flowers. All the while, thoughts of the upcoming party and the possible sale of the business swirled around in my head. On Friday, the day before the event, I went to the mall to buy gifts for my grandchildren. For Pierce, I chose an expensive wristwatch. The boy had always been interested in mechanical things. For Esther, a dainty silver bracelet with a book pendant reflecting her love of literature. I knew Beatrice would find these gifts excessive, but I didn't care. It was my way of showing my grandchildren that despite my strained relationship with their parents, I was always thinking of them. Returning home from shopping, I noticed Christopher's car in my driveway. My son rarely dropped by unannounced, and that alerted me. Christopher was waiting on the porch, nervously shuffling from foot to foot. He looked like me when I was young, the same broad shoulders and strong build, but he inherited his mother's temperament, soft and yielding. Hi, Dad, he said when I got out of the car. I'm sorry I didn't call. It's okay, I said, opening the front door. Come on in. We sat down in the living room and I offered him coffee, but he declined. Dad, he began after an awkward pause, I hear you're seriously considering an offer from Frontier. I sighed. Of course, Beatrice had sent him to talk to me. Yes, I am considering it, I answered honestly. The offer is a very good one. But you always said you wanted to leave the business to me and the kids. There was resentment in his voice. Your mother wanted that, I corrected him gently. And I did think about it. But Chris, I've realized over the last few years that this property has become a source of conflict in our family. That's not true, he objected, but not very convincingly. Chris, I leaned forward. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing, not to discuss my business or investing in the children's future? He looked embarrassed, and I realized I'd hit the mark. I'm going to sell the eastern parcels, I said firmly, and use the money to live the life I want for the rest of my years. That's my right. B will be upset, he muttered. B's always upset when it comes to me, I said dryly, but I'll come to the party tomorrow, and I won't bring it up. I promise. Christopher nodded, clearly not knowing what else to say. He didn't argue, because he knew I was right, but he couldn't agree openly because of his wife's pressure. By the way, I said, changing the subject, I bought gifts for the twins. I hope they like them. I showed him the purchases, and his face softened. They're beautiful, Dad. The kids are going to love them. As he left, I felt a familiar sadness. Christopher was a good man who had fallen under the influence of an overbearing wife. I often wondered if anything would have changed if Madeline had been alive. She was always able to smooth things over between me and my sister-in-law. See you tomorrow, Dad, Christopher said, hugging me good. Bye. I'm really glad you're coming. See you tomorrow, son, I replied, thinking about what awaited me at this party. The day of the party started earlier than usual for me. I woke up with the first rays of the sun, feeling the vague anxiety that always accompanied family events. After lying there for a few minutes looking up at the ceiling, I forced myself to get up. There was much to be done today. The first thing, I pulled my only decent suit out of the closet. It was dark blue with a faint stripe, and it looked a little dated, but it still fit well. Madeline had insisted on buying it the year before she died, saying that a man of my stature should have at least one decent suit for special occasions. You're no longer the young inspector who can afford to show up at formal events in jeans, she said, adjusting my collar in the fitting room of an expensive store. You're a respected businessman now. I grinned, remembering how I'd resisted that purchase. Madeline had always been better at these things. She knew how to fit into any society and knew how important these little details of social etiquette were that I had so neglected. Leaving my suit on the rack on the door, I went to make breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast had been my specialty ever since Madeline had taught me how to make it without starting a kitchen fire. Over the meal, I glanced through the morning paper, but I couldn't focus on the news. My thoughts kept returning to the upcoming party and the inevitable confrontation with Beatrice. Our relationship with my sister-in-law had always been complicated. When Christopher had first brought her to meet us, I had immediately noticed the calculating glint in her eyes as she looked around the house. My business was already generating a sizable income, and Madeline and I had recently renovated the old farmhouse into a cozy modern dwelling. Beatrice politely admired the interior, but I sensed that her compliments hid an appreciation of the value of each item. Madeline, of course, noticed the same thing, but unlike me, decided to give the girl a chance. "Ted, don't be so critical," she said after they left. Beatrice just grew up differently. Her parents always judge people by their financial status. Give her time, she'll change. But Beatrice didn't change. After she married Christopher, she became even more outspoken about her ambitions. Every time we met, she found a way to mention how hard they were living on an electrical engineer's salary, even though I knew Christopher was making a good living. Madeline tactfully ignored the innuendo, and I kept quiet so as not to upset my wife. When the twins, Piers and Esther, were born, our relationship improved a little. Beatrice was so preoccupied with the children that she temporarily forgot about her plans for our property. Madeline and I rejoiced in our roles as grandparents, often taking the babies away for weekends, giving the young parents a break. Those were happy years. With the birth of grandchildren, my wife blossomed. She had always wanted a big family, but we had only been able to have Christopher. Now she could pour all her love into two beautiful babies. I grew attached to them too, especially Esther, who had shown a love of books from an early age, just like Madeline. After finishing my coffee, I decided to take a walk before I started getting ready for the party. The weather was beautiful, a warm summer morning with a slight breeze. I walked the familiar streets of Wheatland, saying hello to neighbors and acquaintances. Many people asked about the party. The news of the twins' college enrollment had spread throughout the city. I politely replied that I was proud of my grandchildren without going into details about our family relationship. Walking past the Old Town Library, I slowed my step involuntarily. Madeline had worked there as a librarian for almost 30 years. Even after my business started bringing in enough money to keep her out of work, she refused to leave. "The library is my calling, Ted, not just a job," she used to say. Only illness forced her to leave her favorite business. Inside the library still hung a picture of her in the children's literature section, which she developed with special affection. I used to go in there sometimes just to look at her, smiling with a book in her hands, surrounded by children. Today I decided not to go inside. Memories of Madeline were already flooding back with renewed vigor because of the upcoming party. She would know how to smooth tonight's encounter, what words to find to make everyone feel comfortable. I, on the other hand, could only hope I wouldn't ruin the party with my bluntness. Back home, I decided to check the gifts for the grandchildren one more time. Pierce's watch box was wrapped in a simple but elegant dark green paper, his favorite color. Inside, in addition to the watch itself, I'd included a card with a greeting and a little poem I'd found in one of Madeline's books. It spoke of time and choosing one's path, a fitting theme for a young man beginning his adult life. The gift for Esther was wrapped in paper with a picture of old books. In addition to the silver bracelet, I enclosed an envelope with a check. I knew the girl dreamed of traveling to Europe after college to visit the setting of her favorite classic novels. Beatrice thought the idea was a waste of money, but I wanted my granddaughter's dream to come true. Looking at these gifts reminded me of how my relationship with my grandchildren has changed over the years. When they were little, we were very close. I taught Pierce how to make birdhouses and repair old radios, and we spent hours with Esther discussing the book she was reading. But after Madeline died, everything changed. Beatrice skillfully used my loss to consolidate her power over the family. She began to limit our meetings, citing my depression and my unwillingness to upset the children with the sight of a grieving grandfather. Christopher, as always, dared not contradict her. Gradually, our relationship with our grandchildren became more formal. Infrequent visits for holidays, polite phone calls on birthdays, but I still tried to keep in touch. Secretly from Beatrice, I sent Esther books I knew she'd enjoy, and Pierce toolkits and parts for his engineering projects. Sometimes they would call to say thank you, and those brief conversations were a real joy to me. The last 2 years of school, the twins became more independent and would occasionally stop by my house without their parents. These visits were always too short, but I appreciated every minute. I could see that, despite Beatrice's efforts, the grandchildren retained warm feelings for me. Pierce became a tall, serious young man with the technical mindset inherited from his father. He planned to study engineering like Christopher, but with an eye toward modern technology. Esther grew up thoughtful and creative, with a love of literature and history, reminding me of Madeline. She had chosen a liberal arts major, much to the displeasure of Beatrice, who dreamed of a more prestigious career for her daughter. I smiled, remembering Esther's last visit. She had come to discuss her choice of college and program of study. Beatrice had insisted on law school, but the girl's heart lay with literature. "Grandfather, do you think I could make a living studying old books?" "Sure," she asked, sitting on the veranda with a cup of tea. "Your grandmother could," I replied, and was happy every day of her life. Her eyes lit up with hope, and I realized I had said the right words. She left that day determined to follow her path despite her mother's pressure. Breaking away from the memories, I looked at my watch. The party was a few hours away and I needed to get ready. I arrived at the party at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. Christopher and Beatrice's house was glowing with lights, voices, and laughter coming from the open windows. The driveway was filled with cars, including the black Lexus of Beatrice's parents, Hubert and Olivia Prescott. The elderly couple from Boston rarely visited our provincial wheatland, considering it not prestigious enough for their status. I got out of my old but reliable Ford, grabbed the carefully wrapped gifts for my grandchildren from the back seat, and headed toward the house. A light evening breeze ruffled my gray hair, and I could smell the aroma of barbecue in the air. Apparently, part of the party had taken place in the backyard. Christopher opened the door, his face a mixture of relief and tension. "Dad, you made it," he said, hugging me. "Come on in. Everyone's here." I walked into the spacious living room, decorated with balloons and congratulatory banners in the burgundy and gold colors of Westfield College. Enlarged photos of Pierce and Esther in graduation robes hung on the walls. My grandchildren looked so grown up and serious in those pictures that my heart squeezed at the realization of how fast time was flying. The room was filled with people, neighbors, family friends, parents of the twins' classmates. I knew most of them because Wheatland was a small town where everyone knew each other. Many nodded to greet me, some came over to shake my hand, to inquire about my health. I looked for my grandchildren, but instead I met Beatrice's cold gaze. She was standing by the hors d'oeuvres table, talking to some woman I didn't know. Her smile disappeared instantly at the sight of me, giving way to a strained politeness. "Go mingle with the guests," Christopher said, nudging me toward the veranda. "I should check on the barbecue." I nodded and headed toward the veranda, where my son said most of the guests were gathered. On the way, I tried to catch Beatrice's eye to at least nod a greeting, but she defiantly turned away, continuing her conversation. The veranda was noisy and crowded. The guests sat at several long tables laden with plates of food and glasses. In the corner, young people, Pierce and Esther's peers, formed their own group, separate from the adults. I noticed that Pierce was standing among them, talking animatedly with his friends. When my grandson saw me, he immediately left the group and approached, smiling broadly. "Grandpa." "Ah," he hugged me and I could smell his cologne, probably his first adult perfume for a special occasion. "I'm so glad you came. How could I miss a day like this?" I patted him on the shoulder, pulling back to get a better look. He looked surprisingly mature in his suit and neatly combed hair. "You look great, like a real student." Pierce smiled embarrassedly, lowering his eyes. Mom insisted on the suit, though I'd have preferred something simpler. "Well, today's a special day," I said conciliatorily. "Sometimes it's worth the inconvenience for the occasion." "Hey, Pierce!" shouted one of his friends. "Come on, we're going to take a picture together." "Sorry, Grandpa, I gotta go," said Pierce. "But we'll talk more later, okay?" I nodded and he ran off to his friends. I decided to go find Esther, but before I could move, Olivia Prescott appeared beside me, holding a glass of champagne. Theodore, she nodded with cold politeness. What a surprise to see you here. Olivia, I tried to smile as friendly as I could. Why surprise? It's my grandchildren's party. She took a small sip of champagne, looking at me over the glass. It's just that Beatrice mentioned that you rarely attend family events, she said with faint sympathy. Something about you having a hard time since Madeline's death. I felt irritation rising inside. It was a typical Beatrice tactic to paint me as an aloof, unsociable old man to justify not being invited to family events. I try not to miss important events, I said in an even voice, especially when it comes to Pierce and Esther. Olivia pressed her lips together, clearly not expecting that answer. Well, that's commendable, she said finally. A lot of people your age would rather stay home. Before I could respond to this veiled attack, Hubert Prescott joined us. Unlike his wife, he wasn't even trying to be polite. Holloway, he nodded dryly. Still hanging on to your old warehouses? Hello, Hubert. I tried to remain calm. Yes, business is going well. Thank you for your interest. He snorted skeptically. Beatrice told me you were thinking of selling. A sensible decision, in my opinion. At your age, it's better to hand over the reins to the younger generation. I felt the blood rush to my face. So Beatrice had already discussed my business plans with my parents. I haven't made up my mind yet, I said. I would prefer to decide what to do with my property. Hubert looked at me with undisguised disdain. Of course, that's your right. But don't forget your family. Christopher and Beatrice have invested a lot in their children's education. College is just the beginning of the expenses. I always keep family in mind, I replied, trying to hold back my growing irritation. And that family wasn't just about money and possessions. Olivia shook her head with a look of superiority. Theodore, no one is talking about money, but you must realize that Beatrice and Christopher expect a certain amount of financial stability, especially since you've always talked about handing the business over to your son. I was about to object when I noticed Esther coming out of the kitchen with a tray of canapes. When she saw me, she brightened up and quickly headed in our direction. Grandfather, you're here at last. She placed the tray on the nearest table and hugged me. I've been asking Mom all morning if you were coming. Of course I'm here, sweetheart, I hugged her back, feeling the warmth spill into my chest. How could I miss such an important day? Esther pulled away, still holding my hands. I'm so excited. I have so much college news and I wanted to show you the book list for my first semester. You wouldn't believe how many classics there are. Olivia coughed, reminding me of her presence. Esther, dear, don't forget the other guests, she said with a strange smile. I think the canapes should be spread. Esther's face darkened slightly, but she nodded. Yes, Grandma Olivia, she said politely. Grandpa, we'll talk later, okay? Mommy said we'll be opening presents soon. Of course, honey, I smiled at her. I'm not going anywhere. Esther picked up the tray and left, leaving me alone with the Prescotts again. I decided I'd had enough of this unpleasant company. If you'll excuse me, I'll go say hello to the other guests, I said, and without waiting for a reply, I went to the refreshment table. Pouring myself a glass of water, I looked around the veranda. There were small groups of people everywhere, chatting animatedly. I spotted a few of my old acquaintances and headed toward them, hoping for more pleasant company. The next hour passed relatively quietly. I talked to neighbors, Christopher's former co-workers, and the parents of the twins' friends. Many inquired about my business, my health, asked about future plans. I answered politely but evasively, not wanting my words to be misrepresented to Beatrice. All the while, I watched Beatrice with the corner of my eye. She was flitting between the guests, a perfect hostess with a perfect smile. I noticed, however, that she was studiously avoiding my part of the veranda, as if I were not here at all. Finally, Christopher announced that it was time to move into the living room for the formal part of the evening, the congratulations and gift giving. The guests began to move inside the house, and I followed, holding my gifts for the grandchildren. In the living room, Beatrice had set up a small stage. Piers and Esther stood in front of the fireplace, and the guests arranged themselves in a semicircle in front of them. Christopher made a touching speech about how proud he was of his children, their achievements, and the bright future that awaited them. Then Beatrice took the floor. Dear friends, she began with a perfect smile, Christopher and I are so grateful to everyone who came to share this special day with us. Pierce and Esther's admission to Westfield College is the result of not only their hard work, but also the support of everyone around them. She looked around the room, lingering on me for a moment, with an unreadable expression on her face. We are especially grateful to my parents, Hubert and Olivia, who traveled such a long way from Boston to be here today. The Prescotts nodded majestically, accepting the applause. And now, Beatrice continued, let's move on to congratulations and gifts. The congratulations began. One by one, the guests came forward, saying kind words and presenting gifts to the twins. I waited patiently for my turn, watching the joyful faces of my grandchildren. They politely thanked everyone, but I noticed that their smiles became especially sincere when the gifts were given by their real friends, not formal acquaintances of their parents. When most of the guests had already spoken, I decided it was time for me to congratulate my grandchildren. I got up from my seat and headed toward the stage, but Beatrice intercepted me halfway there. Ted, she said quietly but firmly, taking me by the elbow, can I talk to you for a minute? Without waiting for my answer, she pushed me to the corner of the room, away from prying eyes and ears. What is it? I asked, feeling the tension building. Beatrice looked at me with a cold stare. I think you'd better leave, she said bluntly. I felt my breath catch in surprise. What? Why? You're not welcome here, she continued in the same icy tone. I only invited my parents. You shouldn't have come at all. I stared at her stunned, not believing my ears. What are you saying? Christopher called me himself, asking me to come. Beatrice pressed her lips together. Christopher is too soft. He doesn't realize that your presence only spoils the atmosphere. Do you see how you're dressed? She gave me a scornful glance at my costume. Everyone's noticed you look like you're from a charity store. I felt the color flood my face, from anger, not shame. Madeline picked out that suit, I said quietly but firmly. And I didn't come to visit you, but to congratulate my grandchildren. Grandchildren? Beatrice let out a short, unpleasant laugh. You don't care what happens to them. When was the last time you took an interest in their lives, their plans? You only show up every 6 months with expensive gifts, thinking that's a substitute for real involvement. I gritted my teeth, feeling the unfair accusation stinging. You know perfectly well that's not true. You were the one who restricted our visits after Madeline's death, making up excuses for why it was better for the children not to see me. I was protecting them from your negative influences, Beatrice countered, from your outdated attitudes and habits. Look at what they've grown up to be because of me. Thanks to you. I couldn't believe her arrogance. Esther still loves the books I gave her. Pierce uses the tools I taught him to use. They grew up to be fine people in spite of your control, not because of it. Beatrice's face contorted with rage. How dare you? After all Christopher and I have done for them. We've given them everything. Our time, our money, our strength. And you think you can just show up with expensive gifts and earn their love? Love can't be bought, Beatrice, I said calmly. Not with gifts, not with control over their lives, and certainly not by expecting them to repay you for your investment in them. Get out, she hissed, finally losing her composure. Get out of my house right now, or I'll have Christopher escort you out. I looked her straight in the eye. In that moment, I saw her whole self, a cold, calculating woman for whom family was just a means to her ambition. She never loved me, never respected me, saw me only as a source of potential inheritance. And worst of all, she used my grandchildren as pawns in her game. Without a word, I turned around, walked to the table where I'd left my gifts, and placed them next to the others. Then, still silent, I headed for the exit. Grandpa, Esther's voice came to me. Where are you going? Aren't you staying for cake? I turned around and saw my granddaughter's worried face. Standing next to her was Pierce, also with a worried expression. Sorry, guys, I said, trying to make my voice sound normal. I have to go. Congratulations again. I'm very proud of you both. But why? Sitter took a step towards me, but was stopped by her mother's hand on her shoulder. Grandpa is not feeling well, Beatrice said with fake concern in her voice. He had better rest at home. I could see that Esther didn't believe this explanation, but I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. Not today, not on their holiday. I'll call you tomorrow, I promised, and with one last glance at the bewildered Christopher, I left the house. The evening air was cool and refreshing after the stuffy atmosphere inside. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, and headed to my car. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out my keys. Suddenly, I heard quick footsteps behind me and turned around. It was Christopher, his face a look of confusion and worry. "Dad, what's wrong?" he asked, coming closer. "Why are you leaving?" I looked at my son, a good man but weak, always under the thumb of his wife. "Ask Beatrice," I said quietly. "She will explain her side of the story." "But I don't understand," he looked genuinely confused. "Everything was going so well." I sighed. There was no point in dragging him into this conflict now, at his kids' party. "Chris, it's Pierce and Esther's day. Go over to their place and celebrate. We'll talk tomorrow." He hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to find out what had happened and the need to get back to his guests. "All right," he said at last. "But we'll definitely talk. I promise." I nodded, knowing that conversation would probably never happen. Beatrice would find a way to prevent it or twist the whole situation in her favor. As I got into the car, I looked up at the lighted windows of the house where the party continued. Through the curtains, I could see the silhouettes of people, hear muffled music and laughter. Life went on there without me, as if I never existed. On the way home, I thought about Beatrice's words, about her cold eyes when she said I wasn't welcome. Maybe she was right about one thing. I really didn't fit into that perfect image of family she was trying to create. I was a reminder of the past, of Madeline, of the times when Christopher made his own decisions. But what really hurt was the thought of grandchildren. I loved them with all my heart, was proud of them, rejoiced in their successes. And now Beatrice was trying to rob me of even that connection. Parking in front of my house, I didn't get out of the car right away. Thoughts swarmed in my head, emotions overwhelming me. Anger at Beatrice, disappointment in Christopher, longing for a time when Madeline was alive and things were simpler. But through this storm of emotions, one clear thought began to emerge. I would not let Beatrice win. I would not let her take the last years of my life away from me. I would not let her control my connection to my grandchildren. I would not cede my independence and dignity to her. And then it hit me, an offer from Frontier Development. This is my answer, my way out of this toxic web. I'm going to sell my business, all those warehouses and offices Beatrice was counting on. Use the money to start a new life, free from her manipulation and control. The decision came so suddenly and seemed so right that I felt a weight fall from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I saw a way forward, a way out of the situation that was slowly poisoning my life. Upon entering the house, I went straight to the phone and dialed Noel Cherry of Frontier Development. It was late, but I left a message saying I was accepting their offer and wanted to start the sales process as soon as possible. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calmness. Yes, Beatrice would be furious, Christopher would be disappointed, but this was my business, my life, and I had the right to dispose of it as I saw fit. I went to the window and looked out at Whitland at night, its lights twinkling in the darkness. This town had been my home all my life, where I'd met Madeline, where Christopher had been born, where my grandchildren had grown up. But perhaps it was time to move on. Time to start a new chapter, I thought, and the thought brought an unexpected sense of freedom and anticipation. The morning after the party was overcast, as if nature had decided to reflect my mood. I woke up early, despite a sleepless night full of thoughts and plans. The decision I had made yesterday in a flurry of emotion seemed even more right and necessary now, in the light of the new day. Over a cup of strong coffee, I dialed the number of Harold Kincaid, my longtime friend and lawyer. Despite the early hour, he answered almost immediately, a habit of the old lawman who always gets up at first light. "Harold, it's Ted," I said when I heard his husky voice. "I'm sorry to call you so early, but I need to see you right away." "Is something wrong?" He sounded wary. "Are you okay?" "Physically, yes," I answered, grinning involuntarily. "Emotionally, too, I guess. It's just time for some changes." Harold paused for a second, obviously thinking about what I'd said. "Did it have anything to do with the party?" he finally asked. "Did the Ice Queen pull something?" I sighed. Harold knew me too well. "Let's discuss it when we meet. Will you be able to see me today?" "Sure," he answered without hesitation. "Come to the office by 10 o'clock. I only have one meeting in the morning, and after that, I'll be completely at your disposal. After my conversation with Harold, I checked the messages on my answering machine. Noel Cherry had already answered my message from yesterday, his young, energetic voice sounding barely contained with delight. Mr. Holloway, this is Noel Cherry from Frontier Development. I received your message and am very pleased that you have decided to accept our offer. I will be in the office starting at 8 a.m. Call me at your convenience and we will discuss the next steps. Thank you for your confidence in our company. I smiled, imagining how excited the young real estate agent was. For him, this deal probably meant a large commission and recognition within the company. For me, it was the beginning of a new life. Deciding not to delay, I dialed Noel's number. Mr. Cherry, I said when he answered. This is Theodore Holloway. I got your message. Mr. Holloway, he exclaimed enthusiastically. I'm very glad to hear from you. Thank you for calling back so quickly. I wanted to confirm my decision, I continued, and to find out what steps we need to take to start the sales process. Of course, of course. I could almost see him nodding on the other end of the line. The first thing we need to do is sign a preliminary agreement. It doesn't commit you to a sale, but it does give us the exclusive right to negotiate for a certain period. We will then do a final appraisal of the properties and prepare a sales contract. How soon can we sign this preliminary agreement? I asked. I can prepare the documents today, Noel answered without hesitation. If you want, we can meet tomorrow morning and sign everything. Let's do it, I agreed. Say, at 11 o'clock at my office on Maple Street? Perfect, I could hear him taking notes. I'll be there with the paperwork. And, Mr. Holloway, thank you again for your confidence. I assure you, you won't regret your decision. After talking to Noel, I felt energized. For the first time in a long time, I was acting decisively, taking control of my life. It was a liberating feeling. I showered, dressed, and headed to Harold's office, located in a small two-story building in downtown Wheatland. His law firm, Kincaid & Associates, had been around for over 40 years, although in recent years there were only two partners left, Harold himself and his niece Tamsin, who had recently graduated from law school. Harold's secretary, an older woman named Doris, who had worked with him seemingly since the firm's inception, greeted me with a warm smile. Good morning, Mr. Holloway, she said, adjusting her glasses on the tip of her nose. Mr. Kincaid is expecting you. Please come in. Harold's office looked the same as it had 30 years ago. Dark wood paneling, a massive desk piled with papers, walls lined with bookshelves of legal tomes. The only modern element was the computer, which Harold used with obvious reluctance, preferring paper documents. Harold himself was sitting at a desk studying some papers. When he heard me enter, he looked up and smiled, but his eyes remained attentive and assessing. Ted, he stood up and extended his hand for a handshake. It's good to see you. Sit down. Tell me what happened. I sank into the leather chair across from his desk and sighed. There was an unpleasant incident at the grandchildren's party yesterday, I began. Beatrice practically threw me out of the house, saying I wasn't welcome there. Harold's eyebrows went up. She did that right at the party? In front of everyone? No, she took me aside. I shook my head. But that doesn't change the point. She said she only invited her parents and that I shouldn't have come at all. Harold whistled softly. Pretty harsh, even for an ice queen. What did you do? I left, I answered simply. I didn't want to make a scene at my grandchildren's party. But that was the last straw, Harold. I've made a decision. What decision? He asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. I'm selling the business, I said firmly. All the real estate. Frontier Development made a good offer, and I'm taking it. I'm signing the preliminary agreement tomorrow. Harold stared at me in silence for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. I understand, and frankly, I can't say I'm surprised. You've been coming to this for a long time. But are you sure you're not just doing this because of last night's incident? It's a big decision, Ted. I've thought about it before, I admitted. But last night was really the catalyst. I realized I was tired of fighting all the time. Tired of Beatrice seeing me only as a wallet. Tired of Christopher not being able to stand up to her. Tired of my relationship with my grandchildren depending on her mood. Harold rubbed his chin thoughtfully. And what do you plan to do with the money from the sale? I'll invest some of it in safe assets to ensure a steady income, I answered, outlining the plan I'd been thinking about all night. Some of it I'll spend on myself, maybe traveling, a new house in another city. And I want to set up a trust fund for Pierce and Esther that they can access after they're 25, directly without their parents' involvement. Smart, Harold nodded. Beatrice will be furious, but she won't be able to do anything. And Christopher? I sighed, thinking of my son. He will be disappointed, of course. But Harold, I never promised him the business. It was Madeline's dream, not mine. And to be honest, Christopher was never really interested in real estate. His passion is electronics, not building management. Fair enough, Harold agreed. So, what can I do for you? You need advice on the Frontier deal? Yes, it would be good if you went through their documents before signing, I said. But the main thing I'm here for is that I want to change my will. Harold nodded as if he'd expected that. To exclude Christopher completely? No, of course not, I shook my head. He's still my son, and I love him no matter what. But I want to make sure that most of the inheritance goes directly to the grandchildren, bypassing Beatrice. And I want to change the distribution of assets so that Christopher gets his share in the form of money or other liquid assets, rather than controlling any property that may remain. That makes sense. Harold opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder of my papers. Let's see what we have now and what needs to be changed. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the details of the new will. Harold carefully wrote down my wishes, sometimes suggesting legal language that would better protect my interests and those of my grandchildren. By the end of the meeting, we had a detailed outline of the new document. I'll have a draft ready by tomorrow, Harold said, closing his notebook. Will you be able to come by and sign it after the Frontier meeting? Sure, I nodded. The sooner the better. As I was about to leave, Harold stopped me with a question. Ted, did you talk to Christopher after yesterday? I shook my head. No, I decided to give him time. He tried to find out what happened when I left, but I said we'd talk later. And when do you plan to tell him about the sale and the change of will? That question got me thinking. I didn't want to hurt my son, but I wasn't going to hide my actions either. After I signed the papers, I decided. I didn't want Beatrice to try to interfere with the process. Harold nodded understandingly. That's reasonable, but be prepared for a violent reaction. I'm always ready for a violent reaction from Beatrice, I said with a bitter chuckle. It's a constant in my life. When I left Harold's office, I decided not to go straight home. Instead, I headed for a small cafe on Wheatland's main street. I needed time to think, to reflect on everything that had happened. Donna's cafe was half empty at this hour, late for breakfast, early for lunch. I took my usual table by the window and ordered a coffee and a turkey sandwich. Looking down the street of Wheatland, I thought about how my life would change after the sale of the business. These buildings, these streets had been a part of me for so long. Every warehouse, every office had a story tied to my years of labor, to Madeline, to our life together. But maybe that's why I needed to move on. Too many memories, too many ghosts of the past inhabited this city. Maybe in a new place I could start fresh, find new meaning in life, new interests. My musings were interrupted by the ringing of my cell phone. The number was unfamiliar, and I answered with some hesitation. Theodore Holloway speaking. Mr. Holloway, came a woman's voice in which I was surprised to recognize Donna Pierce, the owner of the local home improvement store. I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Beatrice was just here asking about you. I'm tense. Beatrice and Donna had never been particularly close, and if my sister-in-law was seeking information about me through Donna, that was unusual. What exactly did she want to know? I asked cautiously. She asked if you'd said anything about selling real estate. Donna replied with obvious disapproval in her voice. I told her we didn't discuss such things, but she was very insistent. She mentioned that she'd seen you meeting with some young man from Frontier Development. I mentally cursed. Whitland was too small for secrets. Someone must have noticed my meeting with Noel and told Beatrice. Thank you for letting me know, Donna, I said sincerely. I appreciate your discretion. You're welcome, she replied. I just thought you should know. This woman, she paused, choosing her words. She's not the nicest person in town. I grinned. Donna had always been a master of understatement. That's for sure. Thanks again for calling. Putting the phone down, I wondered. So Beatrice already suspected something. No wonder she'd started asking people around. Controlling information had always been her passion. I'd barely finished my coffee when the phone rang again. This time the number was familiar. Christopher. "Hi, son," I said, answering the phone. "Dad," Christopher's voice sounded strained. "We need to talk. What's going on? B said you're selling the business." I sighed. Surely she'd already had a chance to talk to Christopher. "I'm considering it, yes," I answered honestly. Frontier Development made a good offer. "But why?" I could hear the bewilderment and resentment in his voice. "You always said the business would stay in the family. That's what Mom always wanted." "Chris," I tried to speak softly but firmly. "Things have changed after yesterday." "What happened yesterday?" he interrupted. "B said you just decided to leave, that you felt sick." I grinned bitterly. Of course, Beatrice had put it all in a favorable light. "That's not entirely true, Chris. Beatrice made it clear to me that I was not welcome at the party, said she'd only invited her parents and that I should leave." There was a pause. I could almost see Christopher trying to digest this information, struggling with the desire to protect his wife and the disbelief in her version of events. "I can't believe it," he said finally. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding. B would never—" "Chris," I interrupted him gently. "What do I mean? Let's not argue now about what Beatrice said or didn't say. The fact is, I've decided to sell the business. That's my right and my decision." "But what about us?" There was a note of despair in his voice. "We've always counted on me to manage this property someday, that it would be part of an inheritance for the children." "And that's exactly the problem, Chris," I said bitterly. "You counted on my property as if it were already yours, as if I had one foot in the grave and was just temporarily disposing of what should rightfully belong to you." "Dad, that's not what I meant," he protested. "It's just that we always thought—" "I know what you've been thinking," I said tiredly, "and I'm tired of it. Tired of Beatrice seeing me only as a potential inheritance, of you not being able to stand up to her, of my relationship with my grandchildren depending on her mood." Christopher was silent, and I continued. "I'm not excluding you from my life, Chris, and I'm not leaving you without an inheritance. But I want to live my remaining years the way I see fit. And if that means selling the business and moving out of Wheatland, then so be it." "Move?" His voice trembled. "You want to leave?" I hadn't planned to reveal that part of my plan so soon, but now that the words had been spoken, there was no point in backing out. "Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Too many memories here, Chris. Too many ghosts." There were muffled voices in the receiver. Apparently Beatrice was beside Christopher, saying something to him. Then his voice came back, but now it sounded strangely determined. "Dad, we're coming to see you. We need to discuss this in person." "Not today, Chris," I said firmly. "I've got a lot to do. Let's meet in a couple days, when things have calmed down a bit." "But Dad—" "Chris," my voice got harder. "I said not today. I'll get back to you when I'm ready to talk." With those words, I ended the call, feeling a mixture of guilt and relief. I didn't want to be harsh with my son, but I knew that if I let him and Beatrice come over today, it would end up being another unpleasant confrontation. I had just paid and was about to leave the cafe when the phone rang again. This time it was Beatrice's number. I hesitated whether to answer it or not, but in the end I decided it was better to face the problem head on. "Yes, Beatrice," I said, answering the phone. "Ted." Her voice sounded strange, tense and almost frightened. "What are you doing? What are you thinking about selling the business?" "It's my business, Beatrice," I answered calmly. "Literally my business, my property." "But you always said you were going to leave it to Christopher." She sounded hysterical. "We were counting on that income for the children's education, for their future." "The children are already in college, Beatrice," I reminded her, "and I've paid for a large part of their education. As for the future, I will not leave my grandchildren without support." "But that changes everything," she exclaimed. "All our plans, all our calculations." "Exactly, Beatrice," I said, feeling the irritation growing in me. "Your calculations. You've been so busy planning how to spend my money that you've forgotten one little detail. I'm still alive, and I can decide what to do with it. You're doing this out of spite." Her voice became accusatory. "Because of yesterday." "I didn't mean to hurt you, Ted. It was just a busy day. A lot of guests." "Don't lie, Beatrice," I interrupted her. You know exactly what you said and what you meant. And yes, it was the last straw, but the decision was long overdue. You can't do this to your family, she sounded panicked now. Think of Christopher. Think of the children. I am thinking of them, Beatrice, I said firmly. More than you can imagine. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. What does that mean? Her voice became suspicious. It means I've changed my will, I said, deciding to reveal all the cards. Most of my estate will now go directly to Pierce and Esther through a trust. Christopher will get his share, but he won't have control over the assets. There was a silence so profound I wondered if the connection had been cut. Beatrice? I called out. You can't do this, her voice sounded like she was choking. It's It's not fair, after everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Beatrice? I asked bitterly. Tolerated my presence at the rare family reunions? Condescendingly allowed me to see my grandchildren on holidays? Or perhaps constantly hinted at how much you needed my money? You're going to regret this, Ted. Her voice turned icy. We'll contest the will. Christopher is your only legal heir. Currency. Challenge it all you want, I said calmly. Harold made sure everything was legally perfect. Besides, I'm not going to die anytime soon, Beatrice. So you'll have plenty of time to get used to the idea that my money won't fall under your control. With those words, I ended the call, ignoring her beginning protests. My hands were trembling slightly, but I felt unexpectedly light at heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of the situation, not letting Beatrice manipulate me. I left the cafe and headed home, thinking about the future. There was a lot to do. Meeting Noel, signing a new will, finding a new place to live. But instead of anxiety, I felt a strange elation. It was as if, after years of stagnation, I was finally moving forward. I spent 2 days in uninterrupted business activity. I signed a tentative agreement with Noel Cherry, approved a new will at Harold's office, and even contacted a realtor in Sunrise Beach, a small coastal town 3 hours from Wheatland, where I had looked at several houses for a possible move. All the while, my phone never stopped ringing. Beatrice called with frustrating regularity. Every 2 hours, like a schedule. I didn't answer, letting the calls go to the answering machine. Her messages evolved from angry accusations to tearful requests for a meeting to discuss things like civilized people. I listened to them with detached interest as if they applied to someone else. Christopher called too, but less frequently, and his messages were more restrained. In the last one, he simply said, Dad, I need to talk to you. Just you and me, no B. Please call me back. I realized I couldn't avoid this conversation indefinitely. Christopher was my son, and despite the complexities of our relationship, I loved him. Plus, I wanted to explain my actions so he would understand my motives and maybe not blame himself too much. On the third day, I did call him back. Chris, it's me, I said when he answered. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I've been busy. Dad! I could hear the relief in his voice. I was beginning to worry. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, I answered, noting that his first reaction was concern, not reproach. Just busy with paperwork and meetings? There was a brief pause, then Christopher spoke again. Dad, we need to talk. I don't want to do it over the phone. Can I come to your place? Just me, without B, I promise. I thought about it. The meeting was inevitable, and it was better to have it on my turf, where I felt comfortable and protected. Okay, I agreed. Come over tonight, around 7. I'll be home. Thanks, Dad, he said with obvious relief. I will. After the conversation, I felt strangely calm. Maybe it was a chance to finally clear up all that had been unspoken between us for years. I spent the rest of the day looking through real estate sales documents and studying photos of homes in Sunrise Beach. The town appealed to me because of its laid-back atmosphere, proximity to the ocean, and relative distance from Wheatland. Close enough to visit my grandchildren, but far enough away to avoid the occasional encounter with Beatrice at the supermarket. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw Christopher standing on the doorstep with an uncertain expression on his face. He looked tired and gaunt, as if he hadn't slept for several nights. Hi, Dad, he said quietly. Thanks for agreeing to meet me. Come on in, I stepped back, letting him into the house. You want some coffee or something stronger? I think I'd like something stronger, he said with a nervous smile. I think we could both use it. I nodded and headed for the kitchen, where I pulled a bottle of good whiskey out of the cabinet, Harold's gift to me for my 65th birthday. I poured us both a glass and returned to the living room, where Christopher was already sitting on the couch, tapping his fingers nervously on the armrest. Here you go, I said, handing him the glass. To honest conversation? He took the glass and smiled slightly. To honest conversation. We both took a sip, and I felt a warmth spread through my body, easing the tension a little. So, I began, sitting down in the chair across from him. You wanted to talk. Christopher took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. Dad, I want to understand what's going on. These changes. The sale of the business, the new will, the plans to move. Is it all because of what happened at the party? I took another sip of whiskey, pondering the answer. It wasn't just that, Chris. It was more like the final straw. You know, a lot of things have changed since your mother died. Not just in my life, but in our relationship. What do you mean? He asked, and I could see the genuine confusion in his eyes. Chris, let's be honest, I said, deciding not to beat around the bush. Ever since Madeline's death, Beatrice had been gradually distancing you and the children from me. Our meetings had become infrequent and formal. You called mostly when you needed money or advice on some practical matter. Beatrice openly expressed impatience with my inheritance, as if I were already 1 foot in the grave. Christopher lowered his gaze, his face expressing a mixture of shame and realization. I didn't think it was that bad, he said quietly. But you're right, I let it happen. I didn't stand my ground when Bea limited our communication, saying you needed time alone after Mom died. Did she say that? I grinned bitterly. I wondered, because to me she'd explained that you were all too busy with your own affairs to visit the old man. Christopher flinched as if from a blow. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have known. I should have seen what was going on. It's not just Beatrice, Chris, I continued. It's about you, too. You let her come between us. You never stood up to her, even when you saw she was wrong. I know. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd always done when he was upset, ever since I was a kid. It was always easier for me to agree with her than to argue. Bea can be adamant. That's putting it mildly, I remarked, but without anger. But you see what really hit me? Not that Beatrice is self-serving or manipulative. I've always known that. It's that you let her extend that attitude to the kids. Pierce and Esther were the only ones I really wanted to see regularly, the only ones I wanted to maintain a close relationship with. But even that became bargaining and controlling. Christopher raised his eyes to me, full of remorse. You're right. I didn't protect your relationship with your children. I didn't insist they spend more time with you. It's my fault, and I don't know how to fix it. I sighed, feeling the anger I'd built up over the years begin to give way to fatigue and sadness. You know, when Madeline was alive, she always told me, Ted, don't be so critical of Beatrice. She's just grown up differently. Give her time. She'll change. But Beatrice didn't change, Chris. And all these years I've let this situation continue because that's what Madeline wanted. She always dreamed that our business would stay in the family, pass to you, then to the grandchildren. But now I realize that was her dream, not mine. What's your dream, Dad? Christopher asked quietly. That question caught me off guard. No one has asked me that since Madeline died. My dream, I wondered. My dream now is to live my remaining years in peace and dignity, without the constant feeling that someone is waiting for me to die to get my estate. To travel, maybe. Seeing new places. To do the things your mother and I always put off. And to do that, you have to sell everything and move away. There was no accusation in Christopher's voice, just an attempt to understand. Yeah, I guess so. I nodded. Too many memories here, Chris. Too many ghosts. And as long as I'm here, Beatrice will never give up trying to control my life and my possessions. Christopher stared silently into his glass as if searching it for answers. Finally, he looked up. I understand, and I can't blame you. You have every right to manage your life and your possessions as you see fit. It's yours. You earned it with your own labor. His words surprised me. I expected more resistance, more attempts to change my mind. Thank you, Chris, I said sincerely. It means a lot to me. But what's going to happen to us? He asked after a pause. With our relationship? Your relationship with your children? I took another sip of whiskey, feeling the warmth of the alcohol softening the sharp edges of our conversation. It's up to you, Chris. On you and the kids. I'm not disappearing from your life. I'm just ceasing to be what Beatrice sees me as. A purse with legs, the source of a future inheritance. I will only be 3 hours away from you. I'll always be happy to see you and the grandchildren. But it must be mutual, not out of obligation or guilt. Christopher nodded, his gaze becoming more collected and determined. I understand, and I promise I'll do my best. But Bee's not going to take it easy, Dad. She's already talking about lawsuits, about contesting the will. I chuckled. Let her talk. Harold made sure everything was legally flawless. Besides, I'm not going to die anytime soon, so she'll have plenty of time to get used to the idea that my money won't fall under her control. What about me? Christopher asked, uncertainty in his voice. I mean, in the will? You'll get your share, Chris, I reassured him. I'm not disinheriting you, but most of it will go directly to Pierce and Esther through a trust fund they'll have access to after 25 years, and it will be money or other liquid assets, not controlling property. Christopher nodded again, accepting this information. That's fair enough. And to be honest, I've never been particularly interested in real estate. It was more B's idea that I'd run the business someday. I know, I said with a slight smile. You were always more into electronics, not buildings, just like your mother was more into books than business. I was the one who saw the potential in those old warehouses and offices. We were both silent for a while, immersed in our own thoughts. Then Christopher asked the question that I'm sure had been plaguing him since the beginning of our conversation. Dad, can you ever forgive me for letting this happen, for not protecting our relationship from all of this? I looked at my son carefully. There was genuine remorse, pain, and hope for forgiveness in his eyes. And in that moment, I realized I didn't hold a grudge against him. Disappointment, yes. Sadness, certainly, but not anger. Chris, I said softly, there's nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was right for your family. You may have chosen the path of least resistance too often, but I understand why. Beatrice is a strong person, and it's not easy to stand up to her. But I had to, he insisted. For you, for the children, for myself. Maybe, I agreed. But you can't change the past. What matters is what we do now and what we'll do next. And now you're here talking to me honestly, admitting your mistakes. That's important to me, Chris. It means that not all is lost. His shoulders relaxed a little, like a heavy weight had been lifted off them. Thanks, Dad. I promise I'll be better. I'll stand up for myself more, especially when it comes to you and the kids. It won't be easy, I warned. Beatrice isn't one to give up control easily. I know, he sighed, but I have to try. For all our sakes. We finished our whiskey in a relatively comfortable silence. Then Christopher looked at his watch and rose reluctantly. I've got to go. B will be worried if I stay too long. I didn't comment on the fact that his wife was probably more concerned about what we were discussing than his well-being. Of course, I said, getting up as well. Thanks for coming, Chris. We both needed this conversation. At the door, he suddenly hugged me, a tight, real hug, like he hadn't hugged me in years. I love you, Dad, he said quietly, and I'm sorry I let all this come between us. I love you too, son, I said, feeling a lump come up in my throat. I always have, and I always will. When the door closed behind him, I went back into the living room and poured myself some more whiskey. The conversation had left me emotionally drained, but also strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, Christopher and I had spoken honestly, without innuendo or hidden resentments. And while I was under no illusion that all our problems were solved, it was a step in the right direction. The phone rang, jolting me out of my reverie. Beatrice's number. I ignored the call, letting it go to the answering machine. A moment later, a new message beeped. Ted, it's Beatrice. Christopher just left for you, and I know you will be discussing this whole situation. Please be reasonable. Think about your family. Think about your children. We can find a compromise, I'm sure. Call me back as soon as you can. I deleted the message, not feeling the slightest urge to call back. Beatrice was trying to control the situation as always, But this time I wasn't going to give in to her manipulations. Instead, I picked up a folder of pictures of houses in Sunrise Beach from the coffee table. One in particular caught my eye, a small but cozy cottage overlooking the ocean, with a spacious veranda and a small garden. I could imagine sitting there in the evenings, listening to the sound of the waves and watching the sunset. It was a new beginning, a new chapter of my life. The phone rang again. This time it was Noel Cherry. "Mr. Holloway," he said when I answered, "I have good news. The Frontier Board of Directors has given final approval to the deal. We're ready to begin the process of transferring ownership as soon as you're ready." "That's great, Noel," I replied. "I'm ready to move forward as soon as possible." "Great." His enthusiasm was almost contagious. "I'll have all the necessary paperwork ready by tomorrow. And if I may ask you a personal question, have you decided where you're going to move after the sale?" "Sunrise Beach," I said, looking at the pictures in the folder. "A cottage overlooking the ocean." "That's a great choice," Noel said. "It's a great place for a fresh start, a new beginning." The words echoed in me with surprising force. That's what I was doing. A fresh start, at an age when most people just live out the rest of their lives without expecting much change. After my conversation with Noel, I went out on the back veranda with a glass of whiskey. The evening was warm and quiet, and the stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I thought about my conversation with Christopher tonight, about his confession of guilt, about his promises to change. Did I believe him? Partly. Christopher had always been a kind and honest man, just weak, easily influenced, especially Beatrice. But today I saw a determination in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Perhaps my decision to sell the business and change the will was a kind of awakening for him, making him see the situation in a new light. Or maybe I was just seeing what I wanted to see. Time will tell. What really mattered now were my own decisions, my own path forward. For the first time in years, I felt free of other people's expectations, of obligations I didn't choose, of roles I didn't want to play. The phone rang again. Beatrice again. I turned the sound off, not wanting her voice to disturb my moment of peace. Tomorrow would be plenty of time for practical matters, for meetings and signing documents. And tonight, I just wanted to savor this new sense of freedom. I raised my glass as if making a toast to myself. "To new beginnings, Maddie," I said quietly, turning to the stars. "I hope you'd understand." And somewhere deep inside, I felt that she really would have understood. Madeline had always wanted happiness for me, even if her idea of it was different from mine. She would want me to live life to the fullest, even without her around. With that thought, I finished my whiskey and went back into the house, feeling strangely calm and confident in my decision. There was a lot of work ahead, a lot of change, but for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the future with hope rather than anxiety. The sale of the property took 3 months, a remarkably short time for such a complex transaction. Noel Cherry proved himself to be a true professional, skillfully resolving any issues that arose and expediting the process wherever possible. Frontier Development did not skimp on legal expenses, hiring the best professionals to handle the paperwork. I signed the final papers at Harold Kincaid's office in mid-October. Harold personally checked every clause of the agreement, making sure my interests were fully protected. "Well, Ted," he said as he handed me a pen for the final signature, "you are now officially free of the burden of being a landowner. And considerably richer," I added with a slight smile as I looked at the line for the final sum of the deal. "That too," Harold grinned. "Frontier paid a good price. They clearly see a lot of potential in developing wheatland." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and nostalgia. These buildings had been part of my life for decades. I'd bought them dilapidated, restored them, turned them into profitable assets. Parting with them was a little sad, but I knew it was the right decision. "And now what?" Harold asked, tucking the signed documents into a folder. "When are you moving?" "Next week," I answered. "I've already bought a house in Sunrise Beach, the one with the ocean view. Most of my stuff is already packed." "And Christopher? Beatrice? Do they know?" I sighed. "Christopher knows. We've talked a few times since that night. He took it better than I expected. Even offered to help with the move. But I declined. I think he needs to deal with his own life." "And the Ice Queen?" Harold made no secret of his dislike for my sister-in-law. Beatrice called almost every day for the first 2 weeks. I shook my head, remembering the endless messages on the answering machine. Then she switched to emails. Threats, pleas, attempts at manipulation. Classic Beatrice. I didn't respond. Wise, Harold nodded. And the grandchildren? Have you talked to them about moving? An involuntary smile appeared on my face. Yes, I met with them separately from my parents. Pierce was understanding, though reserved as always. And Esther, she cried. But then she was happy when she found out my new house would have a room just for her, where she could stay whenever she wanted. You're a good grandfather, Ted, Harold said with a warm smile. And I'm glad you're finally doing what you want to do, not what others expect you to do. I nodded, feeling grateful for his support and understanding. Thank you, Harold, for everything. On my way out of Harold's office, I ran into Hubert Prescott, Beatrice's father. He was clearly surprised to see me, but he quickly recovered himself, giving me a cold nod. Theodore, he said with barely concealed contempt, I've heard about your change in your life. Hubert, I nodded back, deciding not to be provoked. Yes, a new chapter, so to speak. He pursed his lips. Beatrice is very upset, you know. She thinks you are being selfish, thinking only of yourself and not of your family. I felt a familiar irritation rise up inside, but by an effort of will I suppressed it. These people no longer had power over my emotions. Tell Beatrice I wish her the best, I said in a steady voice. Sapranam, now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot to do before I move. Without waiting for an answer, I walked past him toward the exit. It was probably the last time I'd ever see any of the Prescotts, and I had no regrets about it. The next week flew by in a flurry of activity. I hired a crew of movers to pack and move my belongings. I decided to leave most of the furniture behind. It was too big for the new house and held too many memories. Instead, I took only a few items particularly dear to my heart. Madeline's rocking chair, her bookcase with a collection of first editions, family photos, and a few paintings we'd picked out together. I also spent time seeing my grandchildren. Pierce came over for lunch midweek, and we spent several hours discussing his college studies and future plans. He wanted to major in engineering with a focus on renewable energy, a field Beatrice considered not lucrative enough, but one that my grandson was truly passionate about. Grandpa, he said as we said our goodbyes, I want you to know, I understand why you're doing this, and I don't blame you. His words touched me to the core. Thank you, Pierce. It means a lot to me. I'll come visit you, he promised. Sunrise Beach isn't that far from college. I'll look after Esther while you're away. I hugged him, feeling proud of the young man he had become. Thoughtful, caring, with his own principles despite his mother's influence. Esther arrived the next day and our meeting was more emotional. She brought a small gift, a book of Robert Frost's poems with her own comments in the margins. So you won't miss me, she said, trying to hold back tears. I'll always miss you, baby, I replied, hugging her. But you can come visit me anytime. Your room will always be waiting for you. We spent the evening discussing her plans for her studies, her dreams of traveling to Europe, her fears and hopes. Before she left, she suddenly asked, Grandpa, why is Mom so angry about you moving? She hardly ever talks to Daddy, and when I told her I was coming to see you, she made a real scene. I sighed, not wanting to drag my granddaughter into the complexities of an adult relationship, but not wanting to lie to her either. Your mom, she had certain expectations about my estate, and when those expectations weren't met, she was upset. Esther looked at me with unexpected insight. She thought she was going to get your money, didn't she? Something like that, I nodded. But don't worry about it. It's between me and your parents. I'm not worried, she said with sudden determination. I just want you to be happy, Grandpa. You deserve it after all you've done for us. Her words warmed my heart, and I hugged her again, grateful for the understanding and love she showed. On the eve of my departure, I received an unexpected visit. Christopher showed up on my doorstep late in the afternoon as I was getting ready for bed. Dad, he said, looking tired and aged, I just wanted to say goodbye. I invited him in, offered him coffee, but he declined. I won't be long, he explained. Bea doesn't know I'm here. She's She's not herself these days. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, though I didn't really feel sorry for Beatrice. It's hard at home, Christopher admitted, sinking into a chair. Bee's always yelling, blaming me for not convincing you to change your mind. Her parents aren't helping either, constantly reminding me how much we've lost because of my weakness. I listened in silence, not interrupting. Part of me sympathized with my son, but another part of me felt a strange satisfaction that Beatrice had finally faced the consequences of her actions. I don't know what's going to happen next, Dad, Christopher continued after a pause. Bee and I'm not sure our marriage will survive this. I'm sorry, Chris, I said sincerely, but you have to do what's right for you. Just like I did what's right for me. He nodded, his eyes full of sadness and weariness. I know, and I don't blame you. I never have. I want you to know that I'll always be your son, no matter what happens between me and Bee. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling a sudden rush of emotion. I know, son, and I'll always be your father. Nothing will change that. We hugged goodbye, and I felt a new understanding between us, deeper and more honest than before. Good luck in Sunrise Beach, Dad, Christopher said as he left. I'll call you when you're settled in. I'll be waiting, I replied, and this time I really meant it. The day of the move was clear and sunny, as if nature itself was blessing my decision. The truck with my belongings left early in the morning, and I decided to leave in the afternoon so that I could arrive in Sunrise Beach by evening. Before leaving, I walked around the house one last time, saying goodbye to every room, every corner that held memories of years gone by. In the bedroom, I stopped at the picture of Madeline on the bedside table. Well, Maddie, I said quietly, I'm hitting the road. A new place, a new life. I hope you understand. There was no answer, of course, but I thought the smile in the picture grew a little warmer, as if Madeline were really giving her blessing. Just before I left, I heard the doorbell ring. When I opened it, I was surprised to find Donna Pierce, the owner of the home improvement store, with a small basket in her hands. I thought I'd drop by to say goodbye, she said with a warm smile. And then I brought a few things for the road. Sandwiches, fruit, a thermos of coffee. Donna, that's very sweet of you, I said, genuinely touched by her concern. Well, someone has to take care of you, she said, blushing slightly. Whitland will miss you, Ted. You're a good man. I accepted the basket, suddenly realizing that I would miss moments like this, people who had known me all my life. Thank you, Donna. I'm going to miss Wheatland, too. Parts of it, at least. She nodded understandingly. If you're ever passing through, stop by. I'd always be glad to see you. After she left, I took another look around the empty house, then resolutely locked the door and put the keys in an envelope for the new owners, who would be arriving the following week. I had sold the house to a young couple with 2 children. They were delighted with the spacious rooms and large garden. I loved the thought of hearing children's laughter here again. The drive to Sunrise Beach took just over 3 hours. As we approached the coast, the scenery changed. The hills of Wheatland gave way to more open spaces, and the air became fresher, with a slight tang of salt. I opened the window, letting the sea breeze fill the car. Sunrise Beach greeted me with a sunset that colored the sky and ocean in shades of gold and purple. My new home, a small white cottage with blue shutters, stood on a small rise with a direct view of the ocean. The truck with my belongings had already arrived, and the movers were finishing unloading. I got out of the car, feeling the tension of the last few months begin to release me. The air was filled with the smell of salt and blooming oleanders, and the sound of the waves was distinct and soothing. This place was so unlike Wheatland, so far away from all the problems and conflicts I had left behind. The manager, a young man named Ray, greeted me with keys and a folder of papers. "Welcome to Sunrise Beach, Mr. Holloway," he said with a genuine smile. "We welcome new residents, especially people like you." "Oh, Woody, like me?" I asked curiously. "People who come here for the peace and beauty, not for the raucous parties," he explained. "Our town is quiet but friendly. I think you'll like it here." He was right. When the movers left and I was alone in my new home, I felt no loneliness or regret, just a wonderful calm and anticipation of my new life. I spent the first week in Sunrise Beach setting up the house and familiarizing myself with the town. The locals were friendly and easy going, and many of them were migrants like me. People looking for a quieter life by the ocean, after years spent in the hustle and bustle of big cities or trapped by family obligations. I quickly found my place in the local community. In the mornings, I started going for jogs on the beach, a habit I hadn't practiced in years. In the afternoons, I explored the city, getting to know my neighbors, reading books on the veranda overlooking the ocean. Evenings were spent at the local bar, Jimmy's, where people mostly my age gathered for leisurely conversations and a game of chess or cards. About a month after I moved in, I received my first letter from Esther. Not an email, but a real paper letter, written in her neat handwriting. She talked about college, about her new friends, about the book she was reading. There was a brief mention of home at the end. Things are hard at home, Grandpa. Mom and Dad hardly talk to each other. Daddy sleeps in the guest room. Grandma and Grandpa Prescott came over on the weekend, and there was a terrible scandal. I try to spend more time on campus. Pierce is rarely home either. But don't worry about us, we'll get through this. The important thing is that you're happy. I replied with a warm letter in which I enclosed a check for a substantial sum for books and other student needs. I knew Beatrice would be angry if she found out, but now she had no control over my relationship with my grandchildren. Pierce wrote a week later, a short email, more subdued but still warm. He mentioned that Christopher was considering divorce, that the financial situation at home had become strained after Beatrice had spent a considerable sum on lawyers trying to contest my new will. Unsuccessfully, of course, thanks to Harold's foresight. I sent Piers the same amount as Esther, knowing that he would use the money wisely. I also invited them both for a winter vacation, promising to show them the beauty of Sunrise Beach and nearby towns. I didn't hear from Christopher for several months. Then in early December, a short email arrived. Dad, I filed for divorce. B has left me no choice. She refuses to acknowledge her role in everything that has happened, keeps blaming you and me. Her parents support her financially, but her relationship with them has deteriorated as well. I rented a small apartment near the college to be closer to the kids. I hope you don't mind if I come visit you for a few days after Christmas. I have a lot to think about. I replied with a simple, sure, son, I'd love to see you. And I really meant it. Despite all the difficulties and resentments of the past, Christopher was still my son, and I was there to support him in his time of need. Time in Sunrise Beach flowed differently, more measured, more deliberate. I enjoyed every day, every sunrise and sunset, every walk on the beach. Gradually, I began to notice that I thought of Beatrice less and less, that memories of conflict and tension in Wheatland were fading, giving way to new experiences and acquaintances. A particularly pleasant acquaintance was Eleanor Bright, owner of the local Sea Stories bookstore. A woman my age, a widow with intelligent eyes and an unexpected sense of humor, she reminded me of Madeline. Not in appearance, but in spirit, in her love of books, in her ability to see beauty in simple things. Our friendship began with a discussion of Hemingway and gradually grew into daily meetings over coffee, walks on the beach together, evenings at board games. I wasn't looking for a romantic relationship, and Eleanor didn't seem to be either. But our friendship brought a warmth and joy to life that I'd missed since Madeline's passing. One evening, sitting on the veranda with Eleanor watching the sunset, I received an unexpected message from Harold. Ted, thought you should know. Beatrice is leaving Wheatland, selling her house, moving back to Boston to stay with her parents. The town is full of rumors about her financial problems and her failed attempt to contest your will. Christopher looks better without her. I hope you do too. Harold. I showed the message to Eleanor, who already knew the full story of my relationship with my sister-in-law. How does that make you feel? She asked, looking at me carefully. I hesitated, listening to my feelings. Surprisingly, I felt neither triumph, nor gloating, nor even satisfaction. Just a strange calmness, and maybe a slight sadness that it had ended this way. Nothing much, I answered honestly. Maybe relief that this chapter was indeed closed, and hope that Christopher and the kids could live more freely now. Eleanor nodded understandingly, covering my hand with hers. You know, Ted, not many people your age would have had the strength to change things, to start over. Most people would just put up with it, endure it until the end. You showed real courage. I looked out at the ocean, at the purple sunset reflecting in the waves, and thought about the path that had brought me here. A decision made in a moment of humiliation and anger, but one that turned out to be the right decision of my life. I'm just tired of not living my life, I said quietly. Tired of being what other people wanted me to be. And who are you now? Eleanor asked with a slight smile. I smiled back, feeling surprisingly light and free. Just Ted Holloway, a man who lives by the ocean, loves to read good books, and spend time with friends and grandchildren. A man who is finally free of other people's expectations and demands. I like that Ted Holloway, Eleanor said, and her eyes shone with warmth and understanding. I do too, I answered, and it was the truth. We sat in silence watching the last rays of the sun disappear over the horizon, giving way to the stars. Tomorrow Esther and Pierce would arrive for winter break, and I would show them this sunset, this beach, this new world I had created for myself. In a week, Christopher will be here, and we'll talk about the future, his and mine, and Beatrice. Beatrice will be in the past, as she should be. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her harm. It was just that our paths had diverged, and it was for the best for everyone. At this moment, sitting on the veranda of my house by the ocean, with a new friend by my side and the anticipation of seeing my grandchildren soon, I felt truly happy. Not just content or calm, but happy, full of life, hope, and gratitude for each new day. I had made the right choice, and that choice gave me a freedom I hadn't known for most of my life. The freedom to be myself, to live for myself, and to love those who truly deserved it. Beatrice's shadow no longer shadowed my life. I was free. And that was the best reward for all the years of patience and compromise, for all the hard decisions and painful partings. Looking up at the stars in the evening sky of Sunrise Beach, I mentally thanked Madeline for all she had given me in her lifetime, and for the wisdom I had found after she was gone. And I thanked myself for the courage to start over when many in my shoes would have just resigned themselves to living out their days in bitterness and disappointment. A new life was just beginning, and it promised to be wonderful.